Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to join the webinar. So we're going to start in about 3 minutes, 4 minutes. So if you want to get a glass of water or a cup of coffee, you certainly have time to do so. Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. So, starting again. So we are going to talk about how you can prepare for SEC cybersecurity rules. My name is Jennifer Gill. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing here at Skyhawk, and I will be your moderator. So quick agenda. We're going to go through today's speakers. We're going to review the rule and its implications. What should you do? How should this change how organizations approach cyber? Are there other SEC rules you should be aware of? And we'll be taking questions from you. Please use the chat function to ask us questions, and we'll be taking those. And finally, we'll be closing with, if you remember one thing from today, remember this. Okay, so here is our panel of experts today. So first we have Chen Burshan. He's CEO of Skyhawk Security. He has been in cloud security for more than 10 years and holds more than 24 patents. He was part of the leadership team at Dome 9 that created the CSPM space and has expanded Skyhawk's strategy to enable organizations to take a proactive approach to their cloud security for the very first time. So Chen, thank you for being here today.
Thanks. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for joining.
Next, we have Jason Garbis. He's been in cybersecurity for more than a decade. He is co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group at the Cloud Security Alliance and has authored 2 books on the subject. He also has his own security company, Numberline Security, where he advises security leaders to help them define and execute effective zero trust strategies. Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you, Jennifer.
We also have Yair Geva. He is a partner at Herzog, Fox, and Neeman, where he's head of the tech division. He manages a team of lawyers who work on cutting-edge innovation projects for top emerging companies. He specializes in venture capital, mergers and acquisitions, and complex licensing transactions, leveraging deep knowledge and experience in the tech sector and the legal systems of the US and Israel. Thank you, Yair.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And last but certainly not least, Alex Sharpe has decades of experience in cybersecurity and formerly co-chaired the Zero Trust Working Group at the Cloud Security Alliance. He focuses on leveraging technology to drive business value while managing risk, particularly cyber risk. He has influenced national policy, has received a variety of awards and industry recognition, and manages his own cybersecurity consulting practice. Thank you so much for being here, Alex. So I'm going to stop sharing just because I think the panel view might be better for everyone as we're going through the questions. So to kick it off, Yair, why don't you get us started? So what is this new rule and what are the implications?
Right. So in January 2000, last year, SEC adopted rules that require companies for the first time specifically to disclose cybersecurity incidents on Form 8K. It also required companies to describe their cybersecurity management and strategy in their Form 10K, their annual report, as well as to outline very specifically and in details the governance of those cybersecurity management and risks by the board of directors and by the management of the company. This was, in fact, the first time that we have seen specific rules addressing cybersecurity. It's not that before companies were not required to report on material incidents, for instance, or on their cybersecurity strategy to the extent necessary and important. But this was actually made those disclosures specific and required, with companies cannot making a decision whether to report or not, and actually uniforming and making those rules consistent.
Great. Do any of the other panelists have anything to add? Okay. So we'll start with Alex on this question. So what should you do to prepare for this change? And everyone's gonna have to answer this, but we'll start with Alex.
Okay, so first man in, that's cool. I can handle that.
I know.
So I think Yair captured it correctly, right? There was a couple of key points in there. So if you boil this down in its essence, this first rule, and there's a couple of others that are in process for other market participants, but this first rule really says 2 things. One is you need to disclose as part of your 10K, which is, effectively the annual report. Most companies actually write an annual report on top of it, your cybersecurity strategy, so investors can make an informed decision. And the other thing it says is that when a material incident occurs, it needs to be reported in 8K. The key on the 8K piece is material. Now, the definition of material and the practice of reporting on material has been around for about 100 years in other forms in the SEC reporting. If you're a publicly traded company, the new dimension is the cyber dimension. So the first thing I would do was go to find that policy. There has to be a corporate policy. It's required by law if you're publicly traded. Go find that policy, spend time with the person who's in charge of that policy to educate them on cyber and have them educate you on what's required and when. It's very important to update your incident response plans so that the proper decisions are being made at the proper points in time and the right information is getting to the right people. I have to highlight this because if the information doesn't get to the people who need it, that's their problem, not the SEC's or the stockholders. The SEC has historically said, if you haven't made a materiality decision because you don't have the information, shame on you because you don't have the right controls and monitoring in place in-house. The second thing I would do with that, actually, yeah, let's make it the second. The second thing is how to report your cyber posture in a 10K is, we're going to figure that out for a while, because exactly what that means, shareholders are going to have a very strong influence on that, like they do every time a materiality decision in a 10K comes out. So the reports are starting to flow. I would spend time reading the ones that have already been submitted. You can find these on Edgar, you can Google to see what other people are doing and use that as part of your decision making. And then lastly, there's a provision in the reporting requirement that the 4-day requirement can be extended. Legally, they call it tolling, based if it's decided that it's a national security concern. So you should take a hard look at how to engage law enforcement. My experience and opinion is that anytime there's an incident, it's better to err on the side of being conservative and involve federal law enforcement. You can also report through Secret Service and CISA. There's a couple different ways to report, but by engaging them is in your best interest. So those are the 3 things I would do tomorrow, or start doing tomorrow.
Okay, great. Jason, what would you add to that, if anything?
So I think it's interesting is that this represents a big step in terms of the overall maturity or maturation of, I think, this aspect of our industry. And I think it's welcome, even though it is legislation, it's not voluntary. There's so many enterprises that are so immature that having this imposed on them, I think, is going to be helpful. I think it is important as a security leader in these organizations to be able to use this as a, as an outside pressure to say, okay, we need to up our game. We need to be more structured and mature and have a methodology around this. And I think what Alex mentioned is great advice, especially for the annual report. Start doing some research. Look at peer companies or similar companies in terms of what they're disclosing and how they're disclosing it. There's definitely a debate in the industry in terms of how much of our internal security structure, processes, details, architecture should or shouldn't we be exposing? And there's no right or wrong answer to that, but we are seeing, I would say, a shift toward more visibility being taken, more visibility being given to outside stakeholders in terms of how an organization is doing things because of this legislation, and because to give investors and customers a level of confidence. We know what we're doing. Your data, your money, is safe with us because we're doing things in a way that follows best practices. So that's the kind of the annual report. From the incident response or the 8K, this is, you gotta get ready. You gotta practice. You do tabletops, because when this thing hits, it's going to be fast. You've got 4 days. You have to be able to have templates and known communications change and processes that you could execute like that. Because when it happens, everyone's going to be under a great deal of stress. Things will probably be broken that you're expecting to rely on. So you've got to be ready for that.
Great. Yair, how about for you? What would you advise your clients to do to prepare?
Sure. So perhaps just a bit of expansion of the concept of materiality, right? We mentioned that word a few times here. What does it mean exactly? So as a lawyer, it's always the same rule, right? It's what a reasonable investor would find to be a piece of information that person would like to have in order to make an investment decision, right? So when we think about whether an incident is material or not, or whether we want to disclose this or that issue, we have to think whether an investor should have that piece of information when making a decision as to buy or sell the stock of that public company. So that's on the materiality piece. And we also have to think, I guess, about the incentive of the SEC, right? The SEC actually came and said, look, cybersecurity is becoming a very big deal. It's a risk of its own. We have to focus the companies thinking about that. And the purpose of those disclosures is actually, I think, as Alex and Jason very correctly said, will push the companies towards cybersecurity thinking. Board of directors would be, and management are now more on the hook. They're responsible. They have to oversee. The processes for their overseeing are now disclosed. So this is a push and a trend towards getting cybersecurity more in the focus area of the companies, given what's going on in the world.
Okay, and certainly not last but not least, how would you advise people to prepare for this change?
So I think that I will look on tooling to complement all the correct points that were mentioned here. For me, when I'm thinking about the ability to detect, to disclose, to be proactive on your processes, tooling is a key. And as Alex mentioned, when you go to the person responsible for the policy, don't just assume you have the right toolings. We see with current trends, right, and cloud adoption and spikes we see in attacks. It's like almost like an industry truth on the attacks that are cloud native. Right? Don't assume that if you have certain tools, you're covered. So I would, look over the policies, think about how I'm being proactive, how I'm doing all the fire drills for the run books, and I will make sure I have the right toolings for my risk, that my upcoming risk and not past risk in a sense.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I think that's a great point, Chen, which is this for organizations to use this as an opportunity to assess the tooling they have and to recognize that we don't have to do things the old way where, whatever it was, there's great modern platforms out there to help you be proactive, to get much better visibility and to really respond quickly. And that's, I think, what organizations need. And I think this new legislation is probably a great opportunity to say, let's reinvent or rethink the way we're doing this and make this investment because we're legally obligated to do it.
Yeah, when you think about it, the best way to avoid any headaches is not to have any incidents, right? Reality is incidents are going to happen. They're just going to keep on coming, right? But the idea is you detect them faster so you can recover quicker. And a big element of that is the tooling, but it's also putting the right mechanisms in place to reduce the blast radius.
Exactly. If you can keep them from being material, then you're making things much easier for yourself.
Oh yeah, and if you look at the statistics, right, it takes about 9-10 months on average to detect an incident. And that number is actually significantly higher if you take out like ransomware because the attacker wants you to know you're in there, right? So you send them money. The number is actually much higher. And it turns out that only about 1 out of every 3 organizations actually detects their own incidents. They usually find out from somebody else, right? So the tooling and the detection and reducing the impact, those are 2 of the best things you can do.
Totally agree.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to actually a new question, Alex, since you mentioned someone like people don't find out. So Chen, we had a customer find out about something because it was on Twitter. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it goes to the tooling point, right? A lot of the things, we do cloud native security. The industry was laser focused in a sense on doing risk management, right? And being part of a proud member of the team that created the CSPM category that then evolved, a lot of the market is still dealing with that. But the end result is that dealing with posture and reducing risk does not prevent an incident. You need to assume that it will happen. And that's exactly what happened to this specific prospect then becoming a customer. They did everything they should have done to reduce risk. but eventually they got breached because they couldn't handle everything and they couldn't fix all the misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, and definitely not in time. And they were blind to detection. So going, it's almost like the points that we were talking about, they thought that they have the right detection, they didn't. Making sure that you have the right observability beyond visibility, beyond risk management, right for the technology that you're using, for if you're using cloud that is cloud native, that covers the whole environment is key. And for that customer, they didn't, and they realized it in a painful manner. Unfortunately, that cost them a lot of money. Let's put it that way, to try and just to investigate the incident. I'm not even talking about recovery, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So from our perspective, that the lesson on look on the environment, use the right tooling, don't assume that what you're doing is the right thing. Make sure that you have near real-time observability so that you can detect fast and reduce the blast radius and impact was definitely a lesson that we were there. We knew why we're developing what we're developing at Skyhawk Security for cloud native threat detection and response, but that was a lesson we could see firsthand with this prospect.
Okay, so now we're gonna get back into what should an organization do if you're breached? And Jason, why don't you go first this time? And again, this will be for everybody to build on the answer.
If they're breached, well, hopefully not panic. And hopefully they have some level of proactive notification of this so that it's not something that they learn about from a customer or from the FBI or from some third party. I mean, clearly you need to have a clear plan, and you need to have a structure so that no matter who happens to be out of the office or on vacation or unavailable, that you have clear roles that says, okay, this is usually led by Sally, but if Sally's not available, Bob is going to take over for this particular role, and have these playbooks in place. And I think that, the most important thing is to have backup communications vehicles. Maybe you can't use email because it's compromised. You have to have something else to be able to run through this, to be able to connect with the technical stakeholders as well as the legal and financial stakeholders to make a decision around materiality, external communications, et cetera. It has to be, this whole of company effort around the understanding what the situation is, and then carefully managing the communications.
Okay, great. And Yair, from the legal perspective, how would you advise clients if they said, we were breached, people know what's our next step?
Right. So as people mentioned here before, people have four business days to report. It is true that there are exceptions to the rule of reporting, and one could approach the Attorney General and request not to disclose the incident, but that's highly unlikely that would be given. There's actually a concern as to whether there would be any capacity at the Attorney General to respond to those requests. So we're going to see some developments there on the rules and processes to address that. Companies that interact regularly with the defense industries and with the government entities are probably going to be exempted in one way or another. But otherwise, people should just expect to have to report. They do not necessarily have to report the means of remediation to the extent that actually jeopardizes the solution, but they have to deal with the incidents and report them.
Okay. Alex, anything to add? What should you do if you are breached?
Yeah, so the reality is plan your work your plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, we're in polite company, so I can't use the expression I like to, but the bottom line is you're done, right? You've got a real problem on your hand. So you want to have all the questions answered, and you want to practice, because when these things happen, and I've been through more than I care to, you have to work. The first steps are muscle memory. And there's a lot of questions, and they've become more complicated in the past few years. let me give you an example. With the rise of incidents and the payments on cyber insurance policies, the insurance companies have doubled down on sticking their noses into the IR plans, when they get notified, how they get notified. There's a lot of stuff about, do they report to the general counsel? Can you only use who is on your insurance providers, list of favorite providers? There's just a lot of issues. So you need to plan this out beforehand, ask all the questions, and the first step is to act. Contain the breach and act. Now, I always recommend reaching out to law enforcement. Some people don't like to hear that, but having been through a pile of these things, it's always works out in your best interest. And if you look at the numbers, the people that involve law enforcement tend to make better decisions, it costs them less, and they recover faster. And when it comes to the SEC rules, the SEC will favor you, even if they don't give you an additional extension because of the 4-day rule and the exception. Whatever you do will be looked on more favorably because of your being transparent. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Chen, how would you advise what to do if they're breached? Anything to add?
So, we assume that eventually an incident is inevitable, right? So from our perspective, my best advice on what to do is actually starts before. For you to be able to report accurately, to know what happened, you need to prepare ahead of time. And then you need to gather all the forensics, and you need to start and analyze them. And the better choices you are doing ahead of time to make sure that there's a lot of tools right now. There's another technology advancement with generative AI, the ability to analyze data, to get into kind of a summary of the event that is looking on more data points and helping you kind of understand and compare to past incidents. There are things that we are doing in the product that help customers deal with the incidents and contain them. So for me, again, it starts with, you have to do it before. You have to have the right tooling in place early. If you deploy them and it's what Gartner calls mobilization, right? You practice the mobilization piece with these tools, then when this happens, you will be ready. If you don't have the right tooling, gathering all the telemetries and trying to understand what happened manually, it's going to be expensive and painful. So, and you will have to go through it. Otherwise, you won't even understand what happened. So for me, again, what to do starts before the incident happens, not after.
Yeah, and I think this preparation extends into not just the kind of visibility and configuration that Chen is talking about, but the actual recovery processes. I've worked with a bunch of clients on kind of their data backup and restore strategy, and there's some statistics that something like 2 out of 5 servers and statistically are not able to be recovered after an incident, which is crazy. So make sure that you're able to recover, hopefully 100% of your data and servers based on known checkpoints. You can have those things operational again, and then that alone, that's an investment of people, process, and technology. But that alone can probably significantly reduce the impact, and in fact, may even shift things away from being material to being immaterial.
yeah, it's interesting. Every one of us answered the same way, but from a different lens.
Yeah.
Right. The answer was prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. Right. What is that? The motto of the British Army. If you don't prepare, your life is hell. If you do prepare, it's not as bad. It's still not fun. Incidents are not fun.
Yeah. So, but it can change a bad day instead of a bad week or a bad month.
Yeah, and it goes to exactly. It's a bad day with some cool stories to share, right?
Yeah, and maybe to add to this point, I think that we are facing an increased risk for incidents. We see more and more. We said it in Skyhawk. At Skyhawk, we said it like almost a year ago that with generative AI and the fact that the cloud doesn't have perimeter and IAM became like we said we will see more incidents, and we started to prepare for it, right? And now we start to see the industry talking about IAM becoming the IAM and phishing, which is another form of IAM eventually becomes 60% of the attacks, and cloud attacks are raising 75%, and generative AI makes it more easy. So all these forces together, I think that if we look on what happens on the technology front, combined with what happens on the regulation front, these are amazing two forces that people have to understand are going to, they have to rethink what they're doing. They cannot just assume that what they did for the enterprise or the enterprise tools will work for the cloud, that what they had in place is going to work. They have to re-examine what's going on in the industry, both in technology and obviously the obligations that they are under, to make sure that they are really prepared for tomorrow's risks.
That's very important on a lot of levels. I think a lot of times defenders forget that the bad guys or the bad actors have access to the same tools we do, right? It's not just generative AI to do cool stuff and, fancy pictures and, turn security policies into haikus and whatever else you do, but they can also use them in phishing attacks, which improves the effectiveness of the attack, but it also makes, increases the volume of it because they're so much easier. I think it was about a year ago, there was some research put out on the dark web that after ChatGPT became popular, because let's face it, those of us in the industry have been working with AI for decades. It became popular about 16 months ago when, ChatGPT kind of hit the news. But ever since then, I think there was a dark web assessment that said something like, and ballpark, I'll be right, but the exact numbers are off, that it was something like there was 170% increase on conversations about the use of AI on the dark web. And they were reporting something like a 60% increase in effectiveness of AI-enabled attacks.
Yeah.
Staggering.
Yeah, they're faster, more believable, more like tailored to the person. So they're like, oh yeah, I want this coupon. I'll click on that link or whatever it is that makes them engage. So Chen's exactly right that we've seen a lot more, and it makes it, it also kind of lowers the bar to be a threat actor if you can effectively use AI.
Yeah, the other thing that we're seeing from threat actors is they're actually starting to form coalitions.
Yep.
So they're starting to specialize, and what they do is there'll be somebody kind of like a program manager or a systems person or like the main attacker that will pull all the disciplines in and sequence them and map it out. So we're seeing a lot of interesting behaviors out of the threat actors, which is even more reason why you want to focus on detection and why you need AI-enabled tools, because it's happening at speeds faster than a human can respond, right? And it's also showing relationships and the indicators, the insights that we get from AI tools. Let's face it, AI finds things humans wouldn't, and they find them faster, right? So it only makes sense to use them. I know it's a little far afield from the SEC, but it is motivation.
Well, I think it just relates to the conversation, and that their threat actors are going to be using AI for these breaches. So you need to be able to detect these AI-based attacks as well. Since I know AI is kind of a hot topic, I'll know Jason or Yair if you had anything to add on that before I go to questions from the audience, and we do have a couple.
I think, clearly using AI, ML, and that type of analysis for defensive purposes is critical because this stuff happens fast and happens at such volume that it's really impossible for humans to keep up. Recognize that AI does have weaknesses, and there's going to be false negatives and false positives that come out of that, like anything else. And I'm also seeing an increase in the use of, obviously, AI-generated, very sophisticated phishing, targeted phishing, business email compromise, deepfakes, and organizations really need to build in resiliency into their processes and to put some pretty strict parameters around this, such as, we're not going to use SMS or text-based texting to communicate things about our business because it's too easily either compromised or faked. Use an internal system that has authentication around it, a ticketing system or a messaging system like Slack or Teams, for example. Any business process that involves money, set it up so multiple people have to be involved. So there can be a sanity check here, whether it's someone's device gets compromised or someone just gets socially engineered to, oh, the CEO told me to transfer $10,000 to pay the caterer for this event. Okay, I got to go do it. It's urgent, right? Those types of things are too easy for outside attackers to use AI to take advantage of. Those are human weaknesses and process weaknesses, and they are, I would say, straightforward to address, if not necessarily easy, but straightforward.
Right. I would just add that, Jason is describing best practices, right? And they will be different from industry to industry. And there are different rules, by the way. It's not only the SEC disclosure rules. You're going to have, when you have medical information, you're going to have HIPAA. On financial matters, you're going to have financial regulation. But I think over time, my point is that we're going to see litigation, right? Once you have the rules, there will be litigation as to whether people actually practiced those good practices Jason is describing, and those would further define what is reasonable and what is not, and where people have acted, properly or not.
Okay, great. So the first question I have is, will the recording be made available? And yes, we will offer the recording. So that was an easy one. Thank you. And then another question we got, this one is kind of an interesting question. So have you seen changes in your client's behavior or in another organization when they have been breached based on the impact of this new rule? So have you seen people do new and different things? So I'll start with Yair this time.
I'll defer to Alex. He seems very excited about the question. So,
All right. I was just laughing because the answer is, of course.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the short answer is, of course. It's there. I don't know exactly how to describe it. Right.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, like before an incident. Quite often you run into somebody, oh, we got that covered, everything's fine, no, that won't happen, oh, you're paranoid, whatever. And then all of a sudden they're like a chicken running around with their head cut off because something happened, right? And, maybe you need that wake-up call. But I don't know about you. And this is why I was laughing. Because when I was growing up and my mother told me don't step in front of a car because you'll get hurt, I kind of got the idea, right? I didn't have to get hit by a car to know that it would be painful and hurt. So it seems to me the same thing here, right? So you shouldn't have to wait for this stuff to happen. And then the other side is, because there's enough stuff in the news that tell you statistically it's only a matter of time before you get hit. And then you're going to have to explain to upper management why you didn't plan for it when it's all over the news. But with the SEC stuff, frankly, the number one thing I see happening is people fall into two groups, right? One, they come along and they say, oh, what do I do? And it's like, well, these are established practices, get yourself baked into it. And they do that, right? They find out the materiality clauses, who's in charge of it, the stuff we all talked about. Or they sit around saying, this is stupid. We're not going to get we're not going to get any answers until people start, getting fined, right? Don't be that latter category, right? If you're a publicly traded company, these are well-established practices. Find out how you fit into it, because if you don't, it's only a matter of time before somebody comes down and tells you how, and you haven't had the opportunity to educate them on cyber and help them down that path. They're going to make decisions without you that you're going to have to comply with. Don't be in that position.
I think that, and these rules, this legislation exists for a reason, right? And the reason, unfortunately, is that too many organizations have such weak cybersecurity. And to be fair, the attackers are very sophisticated. But as a employer, as an organization, you're providing the service to your customers. And when you have an incident, you have an outage, and it dramatically impacts your employees, your customers. I mean, look at what's happening with Change Healthcare this week, where literally people cannot get prescriptions because of this. I mean, this is serious business, and we have to understand on the security side that we have a really deep responsibility, because everything in our business is digital nowadays. And if we don't do a good job, you can really mess things up for the business, the investors, your employees. Imagine, oh, everyone's got to cancel the vacation and work this week because we have an incident. Why? Because we didn't plan properly. We didn't put in place the right type of proactive detection. We didn't take a modern zero trust-based approach to limit the blast radius. A lot of this can be prevented with proper investment, and you make the incident become just a minor thing. And it's, we got to grow up a little bit in this industry and take a little bit of a harder stance. And yes, it's going to take more time and effort and budget, but the downside is, 1,000 times worse than the proactive investment.
Great. We have a couple more questions, but anyone else want to add to that one?
Yeah, so maybe add to that, and Jeff, you probably know it, in Black Hat just last year, we announced what we call the shift left CDR, right? It was our approach to basically say, instead of just detecting an incident, we will actually, because we know what's in the inventory, we will predict if the lateral movement continues, where this incident is going to land, right? So on basically addressing the materiality of the incident, being able to assess the blast radius of an incident and giving it the right priority with all the telemetry that is going on, right? We were basically able to say, okay, in the threat detection, we won't just look on the past in the rear mirror view. We will actually look forward and try to predict where this is going, so you can prioritize the different alerts that goes into the SOC based on their potential impact. And with that, what we did recently was to add the proactive approach that continuously stress the environment and test it with what we call the autonomous purple team, the proactive approach that tests the environment against its actual risks, right? This whole approach is helping customers prepare and making sure they have the right tools and the right predictions to reduce the blast radius, to make sure that they can predict the incidents and pre-prepare the responses. Because let's face it, most of the attacks are hard to distinguish, because with phishing and IM, how do you distinguish? It's authorized user eventually that are being abused in a sense, right? So how do you make sure that you differentiate legitimate user behavior from an attack, right? Because it's potentially a compromised internal user in many cases. Not all the attacks are going to be, the old brute force in the cloud environment. How can I prepare for it? These attackers, they are sitting, but once they start to deploy the lateral movement, it takes minutes. And think about all the statistics we had here. There's the number of attacks are increasing. The lateral movement itself takes very little time. It takes months to discover that you've been hacked, and usually discover because the attacker discloses it. Just think about all the data points here, right? And how bad it is if you don't prepare. And by the way, they will usually do it Friday, 2 a.m. when everyone is asleep, right? So if you don't pre-prepare proactively, test, prepare the automation, prepare the responses, make sure that you know what are your specific risks, and make sure you have the right automation in place to respond to it. You will find yourself eventually in the news, and you will find yourself eventually reporting on a 8K report. So you need to do these actions ahead of time with the right tooling to make sure you won't be there.
And you had mentioned the news. So, one of the criteria for an incident that has to be reported and would be regarded as material would be anything that has reputational risk. So those leaks to the media or media reporting on the issues turn the matter to material, whether or not, by the way, if it's a huge impact on the business operations from a concrete perspective, but as a reputational damage issue.
Now, that's an excellent point, because if you look at the reports, especially publicly traded companies, the single largest long-term cost is the reputational damage. And you can't qualify that in the early stages.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And,
Okay.
and it doesn't even have to be mainstream media, right? Social networks is a reputational damage, and
Or
and
just
Absolutely.
or just a professional association, right? Let's say you're a manufacturing company with a heavy supply chain, right? All your suppliers know each other, right? They just have to be at one convention. Hey, did you hear about what happened to so-and-so? Oh, they didn't tell me they were hit. That starts that starts rippling through. So even if it's not on the 10 o'clock news, social media, a lot of, industry related networks, this stuff gets around.
Yeah, we work in a very small industry, and I find tech to be very small. Like, the word travels fast. Okay, so we have about 12 minutes left, but I'm going to do our closeout question just to make sure we give everybody a few minutes back. So it was, if you remember one thing from today, remember this. So Chen, you've been going last every single time, so now you have to go first.
pre-prepare, put the right tooling in place. Make sure you're using proactive technologies that gets you prepared to your specific risk, not using some sort of generic rules, because those won't save you on due date when the incident happens. Assume you will be breached. Make sure that you have the right observability tools, practices, run books, automation, and everything is pre-tested so that you can respond in time and minimize the impact.
Yeah. Minimize the blast radius. I liked that saying. That might be in one of my upcoming blogs. So Yair, you can go next.
Sure. So I think Alex had mentioned involve law enforcement, involve the work according to the work plan, involve legal, involve the general counsel, and report as needed by the SEC new rules.
Great. Jason, parting thoughts.
Sure thing. So be proactive. Obviously, that means prepare from a process and a technology perspective. Use this new legislation as a leverage point to get more investment, but also to get excited to make this change in your organization. There's awesome tools out there from folks like Skyhawk to be proactive, really modern and capable platforms, and look at how the industry in general is approaching security from a best practices perspective. In particular, this thing that we know and love called Zero Trust really collapses all those best practices. And if you do that, you can be proactive from a technology perspective, from a process perspective, and you can really limit the blast radius of these inevitable incidents.
Hey, Alex, parting thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm going to give one parting thought and then two comments. So a total of three things. The first is, remember, there really isn't anything new in the SEC rule that we're talking about. it's new to cyber, right? So leverage that history, leverage those best practices, leverage all of that, right? So you can do two things. First of all, you can influence the folks, educate them on cyber, because you know more about cyber than you've probably forgot more about cyber than they will ever know, right? So educate them on that, collaborate with all the different aspects of the business to leverage what's already gone on to make informed decisions and prepare for the eventual. The second is all of us are on LinkedIn, and I'm sure every one of us would welcome a connection or a reach out and all that. And then lastly, I'm going to say, thank you to Skyhawk for hosting this. I think it really says a lot about them, because this really wasn't a plug for the product, even though their product does a lot of good stuff. I like the way they take a proactive approach, with the AI and all that. But kudos for them for, really serving their audience instead of turning this into marketing for their product. So, thank you for the time.
Yeah, no, thank you all for joining us. And actually, if you go to the Skyhawk website, and this is not a product plug, it's a plug for Alex's blog. Alex wrote a blog for us around SEC, which gives just a little bit more guidance. So you can check that out. It's not gated, so that information is available to all of you. And we'll be following up with an email with a link to the recording, a link to, we wrote a white paper on this SEC cyber rules, which is just guidance. We're able to leverage a RACI from Gartner in there as well, and then a few other guidelines that you can take a look at. So there'll be additional resources that will be available to everyone who registered as well. So Jason, Alex, Yair, Chen, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great webinar. You made my job really easy as the moderator, which I always appreciate. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.